G'day folks, and welcome to this unboxing of Downfall, Conquest of the Third Reich. This just arrived in the mail today and I am super excited about it. Published by GMT Games 2023, it was designed by Jensen and Butterfield, and Jensen was consulted as part of the design process. Many of you will be familiar with the story here. Chad, I believe, started the design, and following his passing, John, I think, took over the design process. A bit of a summary on the back. Basically, this is a two-player game. You have the Western Allies and the Soviet Union playing against each other, in the sense that one player controls the Western Allies and OKH, and the other player controls the Soviet Union and OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. So it's kind of, that element is reminiscent of the old, I think it was an SPI game, The Battle for Germany. I've got the Decision Games. I'm looking over to see if I can find it. I have the Decision Games version somewhere. It's a very basic hex and counter game. This kind of takes that idea that you control, the two sides, and it escalates it to sort of a modern game design. So Chad Jensen did a lot of the original map artwork, and then I understand that Mark Simnich did some final edits on the design, or took over the art in recent years. So it's a two-player, but in effect you're playing as both the Allies and the Germans. I'll get the box. It's a beautiful box art, by the way, illustrated by Marcos Villarroel. Villarroel. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I'll make some room for all these components because it's quite a hefty box. I can tell there's a lot in here. The rulebook. Okay, what can we see here? The game map playing pieces. Disregard the rules marked by naval orange if playing the Overlord scenario. Okay, big introduction here. Summary of game turns, the game map, which we'll see in more detail in a moment. An explanation of hexes. Basically, you're fighting for these objective hexes. They're victory point hexes. And you need to control a margin of 10 victory points is an automatic victory. Otherwise, whoever has the victory point margin at the end of the game wins. You've got strategic warfare display. So there are 3 strategic warfare areas: the Siege of Malta, as you can see here, the Battle of the Atlantic, and strategic bombing. And this is all printed on the map, so we'll see this in more detail in a moment. But this adds an element to the fighting, objective, victory, turn track. So the game is played in turns, but not necessarily back and forth. It actually uses this initiative track, and the player who has the lowest initiative has the action. So I think there's the potential there for you to have multiple actions based on where you are on the initiative track. You can do a big action which pushes you really far ahead, and then your opponent may get multiple turns in a row. This is also used to trigger events and to change weather conditions as well. So there'll be, when your marker moves over an event box, you'll trigger the event and you'll play the event. And when the weather marker is, I think, past a start weather space and lower than both players, you trigger a change in the weather, which is a really interesting system. Force pools, markers, event card display. The events are really interesting. You have a discard pile, a current event, and a pending event as well. You always flip the top card over so you'll know what's coming up in future. The counters, the combat units are really interesting. They use pips instead of strength, so you're adding up pips in combat. You add up your modifiers, you add up your combat pips, add some modifiers. You then create a combat differential and use the CRT to find the combat differential, and then you add dice roll modifiers. So it's a slight variation on the most common sort of combat odds ratio using the differential system, which is kind of less common these days. Zones of control, partisan units, air units, naval units, beachheads, etc. Then you have event cards, which I just touched on, but there's also action cards. I haven't mentioned actually yet. So there will be a action rounds. Let me get to it. Here we are. This is the action track, and there's another summary here. So you'll have all these, you'll draw chits and place them on the action track, and the active player gets to choose one of their action chits on this track. There are 10 chits drawn. When you play a chit, you immediately replace it, or you can play your action cards. You'll have a hand of action cards. So you've got this option of the action track, picking an option that is on the action track, or playing a card from your hand. And here's a summary of the different, usually you'll be playing an action chit to perform orders, attacking, redeploying, recruiting, headquarters, mechanize, things like that. So you're using these actions, spending initiative points, and I'll show you this. I'm sure there's a chart, I know there's a chart, that'll sort of summarize the costs of these actions. They cost initiative points to perform. If you want to perform material shortages, you take this counter, pay the initiative, move your marker up the track, and then perform the action. And then you may get the next turn, so you'll be able to perform a second action from this track. Here's a summary of land combat, which I've kind of gone through very quickly. Fairly straightforward combat, but really interesting system. Naval interception and sea attacks, resolving events. Here I mentioned there is a sort of a discard pile, current event, and the future event, which you'll know about. Supply issues, isolation, new turn, victory, and then an example of play, and then design notes. Okay, index looks pretty good, 2-page index, and a summary of the map key on the back. Okay, so let's see what else we have. We've got a lot of, there are about a dozen different cards. So we've got 2 of these player aid cards with the combat table. You can see it's the differential up to +8 down to -4, and then the die roll with various, so you've got strength modifiers, which modifies the differential. And then you've got the die roll modifiers. So add up your pips, subtract the defenders, but add modifiers. You get a row, a column, and then you'll apply die roll modifiers, roll the die, and get a result. The first is the number of pips lost by the attacker. The second is the number of pips lost by the defender. On the reverse side, a summary of movement costs, stacking limits, air units, etc., partisan warfare, and so forth. Then we have 2 of these. These are summaries of the different orders. So if you can imagine, one player is playing the Western powers and the OKH. And yeah, so basically you'll be looking at this sheet. You'll be controlling the Western Allies and then fighting against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. Conversely, your opponent will be playing as the Soviets and trying to stop the Western Allies on the Western Front using OKW. And this is, yeah, all the different actions they have access to. This is setup for the campaign game, Husky scenario, setup for the campaign, and Husky scenario. Then we have setup for the campaign and Overlord scenario, campaign game, and Overlord scenario, Husky scenario. So a lot of these scenario cards, Husky and Overlord. Then we have the counter sheets. Is it me or is GMT getting thicker and better with every year? So nice counters, pre-rounded edges, so they will just pop out. There you go, yeah, no need to punch. So you've got all your infantry units down here. Again, pips is central. What I am a little concerned about is, I mean, these aren't blocks. You know, when you play a block game, the pips up the top is what you're looking at. You'll have to be careful with orientation of these units because basically, as you change the orientation, they lose strength. So you need to be very careful that you have a sort of fixed orientation and you stick to it. Here you have actions and then units, control markers, naval forces, air forces, Soviets, units, actions, various administrative markers. All right, let's have a look at the map. Some baggies, 4 dice, 2 decks of cards. So I mentioned these action cards. You'll have a hand of these. And they're not only action cards, but events, sorry. These look to be the action cards. I'm intrigued here. You can see action, there's a summary of the turn, but there'll also be events in here as well. I wonder where they are. They're in there somewhere. All right, let's look at the maps. 2 maps. I read that it was a 36, wow, this is huge. This is huge. Okay, this is not going to fit on camera. Let's go do a bit of a time. You can see the initiative track up the top here. So you'll start, 2 powers on the initiative track. You'll play an action, which will increase your initiative. And then because your opponent will have a lower initiative, they can perform an action, and so forth. You'll notice you'll occasionally pass these event markers, and eventually you'll get up to this weather marker, which will change the event. What else can we see? We can see, okay, I haven't mentioned, this is an 8-turn game. Each turn represents roughly 4 months. And the game starts in November 1942 and runs through till May 1945. Though, as I mentioned, the game can end earlier. So roughly 4-month periods. It represents the fall, the downfall of the Reich. What else do we have? Here is the victory track along the left here. So I mentioned automatic win. Whoever has the positive margin of victory at the end of the game wins. Here is the action track for the 10 actions that are available. Again, you draw these from the cup. I'm not sure exactly what this is. Oh, this is a summary of, looks like upgrades. Spend +1 supply for each of your faction's other markers ahead of the one you pick. I'm not sure, too familiar with that. Around the board, so you'll see here we have the Siege of Malta. This is that strategic track. Up here we have the Battle of the Atlantic strategic track. You'll notice, of course, big hexes, sort of grand strategic. These are the objective hexes that you're striving for. If I can scroll to the bottom, right, so this is probably where the Western OKH player would sit on the left-hand side of the map, and once you play an order, you put it down here, and it tells you, quite simply, the initiative cost. Okay, so, to play this costs 3 initiative points. To play a recruit costs 21 initiative points, so there's big difference. Strategic warfare costs 8. What else do we have here? Recruit and mechanize for the Western powers. Yeah, you choose, one of those to place. Okay, let's have a look at this is the Western side of the map. There are some little sort of specific rules, so Kiel, Canal, Kattegat. What else do we see here? Strategic bombing of the Reich industry. Yep, let's look at the other side of the map. Okay, so yeah, and you can see here, this is obviously where the Soviet OKW player would sit. So they're controlling the Soviets, and then Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. You can see the coverage of the Eastern Front there, coming down to the Caucasus down here, Tiflis, Grozny, Astrakhan. The initiative track runs around here. We have, as I move the map up, a space for the events. So when this box is empty, the Western faction gains an air unit. This is the discard pile, this is the current event, and this is the draw pile. This is the weather, so there may be a weather summary card. I don't know, I haven't seen it, but this is where it looks like a weather card would go summarising that. Force pull down the bottom right, Suez Canal, special rules way down the bottom. Yeah, very cool, very clear. The map is fairly straightforward. Pripyat marshes, a lot of clear terrain, some wooded terrain up in the north. Summary of terrain features down the very bottom right of the map. You've got hills, mountains, swamp, forest and clear. You've got some areas that are out of place, such as the Caucasus, some black lines meaning impassable. Yeah, and it's just a single-sided map. All right, so I'm kind of curious now about these decks of cards. I don't normally crack out decks straight away, but I am intrigued, and I'll try and crack them open easily. Because I kind of want to see what these event cards look like. They did show some sample images. They're things like the ones I saw, I think they're stuff like extra recruits or, oh, I really can't recall. Okay, so these look to be, these are actions. Great, I've just unpacked the action deck. And trying to get the other deck open. I can never get these things open easily. Really tough plastic. All right, here we go. Okay, so these are, yes, Soviet actions. Here we go. These are the events. So I think King Michael is, I thought I read that this is the first event to take place. Maybe it's scenario specific. So if Romania is an Axis country, then Romania surrenders. Eliminate all Romanian units, red tide over Europe. If revealed on turn 8, immediately remove this card from the game and draw another. Interesting. If the Soviets control 2 more ports in the Baltic Sea, deploy your Baltic fleet. If they control no ports, permanently remove the Baltic fleet. United Nations, if there are 6 or more Western partisans in play. Otherwise, whichever faction controls more objectives than the other, on turns 1 to 4, they draw an action card, or turns 5 to 8, they gain a VP. So you'll know this is coming up. You'll have a bit of advanced notification. Soviet reserves, 4 infantry. Cool. Mediterranean dominance. So you kind of, the downfall, here are the weather cards. So fair weather, snow, mud, and summary cards like that. What was I going to say? It's inevitable that the Third Reich experiences a downfall. The Soviets will be pushing from the east, Western allies from the west. It's really kind of who can do relatively the best and secure those victory points. Yeah, there we go, folks. That is Down for Conquest of the Third Reich by Chad Jensen and John Butterfield and Kai Jensen as consulting designer on this. Dice in there, maps, very cool counter sheets. What else haven't I mentioned? I mentioned 8 turns, the initiative system, lowest initiative goes first, the weather, the markers. I think I've covered most of the core rules to give you kind of a feel of how this game plays. I mentioned sort of your action cards. I mentioned those strategic warfare boxes that have an effect on play. That's pretty much the core of the game. Intrigued by the combat system. I've played differential systems before, and they're quite nice. They're easy to. I just like the simplicity of how easy they are to work out. You don't have to be doing complex division. Yeah. So, folks, excited about. Oh, how big is the rulebook? 44-page rulebook. It really didn't seem that much as I was flicking through it. Okay, example of play. 37 pages, but really, it's what is the complexity rating? I didn't look too closely at that. So it's rated 5 with low solitaire suitability. I don't know why that's low. This really seems like a great solitaire suitable game. I know I've played the Battle for Germany, 2 players, like solo. And it works well. I suppose you're controlling 4 different factions and in your mind, which might be a bit of a cognitive load, but look, I'll be doing it anyway because I'm really keen to see how this plays out. Yeah, we'll be giving this to the table hopefully soon. It's a bit of a queue at the moment. In any case, folks, check it out if it's of interest. Down for Conquest of the Third Reich. Thanks for watching.